To make the case for Canadian film, it's important to know what's what. Canadian filmmakers work in a system that is specifically designed to help them succeed. So how do filmmakers fund their films? Canada's feature film funding system builds its movies on a three-legged stool model. The first leg is direct funding from the government, such as telefilm or provincial production funds. The second leg is labour tax credits that reduce the cost of employing cast and crew. The third is the market, distributors and broadcasters who pay license fees for Canadian or international rights. More than 100 feature films get made each year, but how do these films get to audiences? That brings us to distribution. Canadian distributors buy the media rights from Canadian producers before the film is made, which helps complete the finance plan and gives other investors, like Telefilm, confidence that the movie will be marketed and made available to cinemas, streaming platforms, broadcasters, schools, and airplanes in a professional way. Unlike in broadcasting, where broadcasters are required to make about 1/3 of their content homegrown, there are no quotas for Canadian content in cinema, and most movies that are seen here are from Hollywood. Only about 10% are independent, of which 5% are international independent cinema, and the other 5% are from Quebec and the rest of Canada. Canada's independent movie distributors are the ones that bring that 10% of non-Hollywood films to the Canadian market. This is the system that has existed since before the use of the internet and is governed by the Broadcast Act. The Broadcast Act was last updated in 1991. While the world changed around us, Canadian cultural policy stayed focused on broadcasters, until now. Bill C-10 is a proposal to modernize the Broadcast Act. It will define the powers given to the CRTC, who manage the nitty-gritty of license terms for broadcasters, like CTV, CBC, Global, and Rogers, and how to license the streamers such as Amazon Video, Netflix, Crave, and Hulu to level the playing field. Also, for the first time, the Act proposes to require programming that reflects the viewpoints of Indigenous people and all of Canada's many and diverse communities. Online streaming has disrupted the distribution landscape for film, blurring the lines between broadcast and theatrical distribution, creating a unique niche in between the two. As this legislation is developed, we believe it's important to consider feature-length film in the mix. So what should the future look like for cinema? And how can we make sure that the new rules benefit a more inclusive, competitive industry?
Bonjour, hi, my name is Claudia Hébert. I'll be your host today for this third panel of the Making the Case for Canadian Cinema symposium. Today we will discuss Canadian film industry and the sustainability of the careers for those who make it. Because when you work behind or before the camera, there might be a temptation at some point to go try your luck on the international market. Maybe do a few projects abroad in the United States, maybe answer the call of Hollywood, and it makes you wonder, should I stay or should I go? And that's the question I'll ask my guest today, starting with Michael Greyeyes. He's in Toronto, joining us in Toronto. Actor, choreographer, director, educator, founding artistic director of Signal Theatre. He is Nehiyaw of Muskeg Lake Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, and we saw him in films, American films like Woman Walks Ahead, the series True Detective, I Know This Much Is True, Fear of the Walking Dead, and very recently he received the Canadian Screen Award for Best Actor for his performance in Jeff Barnaby's Blood Quantum, fantastic zombie film. Also with us from LA, we have Tonya Williams, actress. She's been in LA for a few decades. She had a role for years in The Young and the Restless. She is founder and executive director of Reelworld Screen Institute and Reelworld Film Festival. Reelworld was created to serve Canadian Indigenous, Black, and people of color in the screen-based sectors by providing platforms to develop, to showcase emerging talents. We also have Jade Hassouné. Jade grew up in Montreal, had his big break in the fantasy series Shadowhunters, and many roles in Hollywood, in Toronto. Now he's acting in Quebec in a series called Alerte. He is also a musician, released his first EP last year, Love Letter to a Fandom. And finally, writer and director Emma Seligman joining us in San Francisco. Her first feature, Shiva Baby, was released this year. It was shot in New York with American actors. She's been based in the US for the past few years as well. So first of all, I want to get to know you all a bit better and understand the trajectory of your careers. And I'll start with Michael, because your first calling wasn't acting, it was dance. You were dancing in Toronto for years before turning to acting. What happened? Why dance and then why acting?
Well, I'm from Saskatchewan. I'm from Treaty 6 originally. And I was dancing recreationally, and the National Ballet of Canada, based in Toronto, I was holding national auditions, and my sister, on a whim, decided to send in our names, and I was accepted, much to my sister's chagrin. And we moved my entire family to Scarborough, where I grew up while attending the school. And I danced in Toronto for a number of years before moving to New York City to dance with Elliot Feld. And it was after I danced with Elliot for a number of years that I became interested in cinema. And I began very slowly in Toronto to find my footing in the theater community and also in film.
So right away in the dance career, there was a calling from the States as you went to dance in New York City. Why did you make the jump from Toronto to New York in the first place?
Well, of course, New York is a major center for dance across the globe. So Karen Kane, who was dancing at the time, suggested Elliot as a choreographer that I should investigate. And I went down to New York City and I auditioned for his company, and he hired me. So right away, there was an international aspect to my career. As a Cree person, a Native person, I am able to work in the United States without needing a green card because of the Jade Treaty and other immigration law. So crossing the border for work is relatively easy for some Native people.
So when you started acting, it was right away with American projects, or were you going back and forth across the border?
Well, my first gig was an American gig for TNT television. And then while I was on set, I sent in a self-tape, an early self-tape, for Dance Me Outside, which was a Canadian feature. So in my first year, there was a good example of what will happen to me, I guess, for the latter part of my career. I work in the US and I work in the States. I mean, Canada.
Tonya, you studied acting at Ryerson in Toronto, and it didn't take long before you left for the States, for California. Why that jump early on in your career?
Well, I didn't actually even arrive in Canada till I was 12 years old. So I think, and I was coming from England. I think if you're born in one place, maybe that change seems more drastic, but traveling already was something that I did. And actually, when I started at Ryerson, I was already working as an actor. So I actually had to put my acting on hold to take the program because you weren't allowed to work while you were in the program. And then when I went back to it, it was a good while though. I started the program, I think in the late 70s. I didn't really move to Los Angeles till 87. So I had put in a good 5-6 years in Toronto. And I thought what was funny is everybody was always saying how I was booking all the jobs and I was barely making a living. So the opportunities were so small that I think when if I'm booking all the jobs and I can't make a living, that this is, it was too difficult. We're talking, this is the mid 80s. Things were really exploding in America. The Cosby Show, a lot of Black shows were happening, and nothing like that was happening on the Canadian side. So the move actually happened because I was doing a Disney film in Toronto, and that producer said, you should go to the States. And he and his wife had a production company there, and they actually made a call to an agent there. And I went down and met with that agency. And it was right at the time that I had just gotten my H1 visa, because a lot of Canadians were getting it at that time. I don't know if it's not even an H1 visa anymore. Who knows what letter it is now. But I started going back and forth. But pretty soon you realize you have to really base yourself in the States. They start to think that Canadians are very fickle. If you're you're kind of there and then you're gone, and you're there and then you're gone. So I think those were the scariest first 2 years, because I had to be turning down work in Canada, and it wasn't like there wasn't that much, but to prove that I was serious about staying.
And trust the process, trust that it would work over there.
Yeah, or at least trust the gamble.
Yeah,
fully.
And how long was it before you booked The Young and the Restless, a role you played for what, 10 years?
Yeah, so I arrived in Los Angeles in '87, and then I did a number of TV commercials while I was being rejected for television shows. I did some guest spots on sitcoms, but then in 1990, the audition came up for Young and the Restless, and my agents just did not want me to do that, because when you're Black at that time, and even now, sitcoms is where all the money is, and that was where my experience was. But I was so tired of doing sitcoms. I just really couldn't see that I wanted to do that, just continually do that. So yeah, I fought to be on the show, even though my agents didn't want me to. And then yeah, in 1990, I booked that job, and it kind of just changed everything for me.
They wrote it for you. That's the crazy thing I heard.
Because you know, it's interesting, because you're Black, people assume that sort of, especially at that time in the States, like all Black people had to sound and be a certain way. And I was really fighting against that. So every time I would go to these auditions, and I knew what they wanted real, like, urban from the projects, whatever it was they were looking for. I would specifically,
or a stereotype.
Yeah, the stereotype, absolutely. And I would just not do that. I'm sure they were like, poor girl, she can't act. She doesn't know, she can't be Black when she needs to be. So I went on audition for, you know, it was your typical stereotypical role where it was, she was like a girl on the streets, you know, education, illiterate, whatever. But I did not read it the way they wanted to. And so, yeah, the show called me back a week later, and I was like, they couldn't possibly want me back for this role that I knew I did not do the way they wanted. But they wrote a character that was, she was a doctor. I think '87 was the beginning of people really wanting to make those changes and wanting to show a little bit of different representation. And so I just happened to be at the right time in the right place, and for that to explode, because that character got so much attention from the Black community, because they were not seeing positive role models of themselves on television. And not just here, because even when I would go to France and I would go to Europe and other countries, Young and the Restless was the only positive Black representation show, even in Europe. So,
and that show was everywhere. It was
really everywhere. It was in 96 markets. So it really just blew up everything.
Yeah.
I remember being at Cannes one year with a filmmaker that was a very, you know, successful indie filmmaker who could care less about soap operas. And while we were walking down in the Croisette, people were like, oh, Olivia. Like, what are those people talking about? And they were all the people who worked at Cannes, by the way. They weren't the people who were, you know, the filmmakers. They were the workers at Cannes. They are the biggest soap opera fans.
So right place at the right time. I want to turn to Jade. Grew up in Montreal, Lebanese origins, French speaking, and then at some point you think, I'm going to study acting in English, and it paid off because you started your career in English with Shadowhunters. It's your big break. How lucky is that?
It was a very interesting journey. You know, I didn't know when I went to study theater that in Montreal there was two industries. I thought it was all together. I'm like, I speak French, I speak English, I'm good. And then it put me in the English market. So I started working in English, which I did for 10 years until this year. This year was my first role in French ever. And I got a lead on a Quebec series, which is a really lucky and perfect timing thing because of lockdowns and everything. And I was back in Montreal.
And I love that it's the reverse process. It's not starting from home and then leaving. You started and then you come back home.
Yeah. It's something that my agent first told me. I think the first meeting we ever had, she said, because I asked her, I'm like, should I go to LA? Should I leave? You know, I have all these dreams. I want to do all these things. And she said, you know what? If you're talented, they will find you. So she's like, stay here, do your thing, and they'll find you. And she was right, because I worked early on for Disney. I got, that was one of my first things. I got a movie, but you know, a lot of stuff is shot here in Montreal, so I got a supporting role in that. And then I got another film that brought me to Brussels. Little roles, you know, but they were all kind of happening here. And then when I went to Toronto to do the CFC program, that's when I did Shadowhunters, because it was shooting there. So I don't know, I was, again, in the right place. Obviously it's a lot of work, and you never know what's coming and how it's going to happen or where you should be. I'm back in this place, you know. I'm so happy about this panel because it's like inspiring me to sort of reorient myself and figure out what I'm doing.
Because right now, are you back in Montreal? Or are you in Toronto? Yeah, you're in Montreal.
I'm back in Montreal.
Like I see reverse process coming back to Montreal doing French shows. But I'm thinking of what Tonya just said, where when she said at some point you have to make the move and be there, maybe in LA to do those auditions and book those jobs. Is there that little tug of war inside of you thinking, Absolutely. Do I want to really get into the French-speaking Francophone Montreal market, maybe France, I don't know, or do I make it for the States? Is there this conflict inside of you right now?
Yeah, there is. And I'm even doing music right now. I'm doing music in French, which I just started, but things are happening. Like my music's on the radio, and I started to export it in France. So it's starting to play on the radio in France. So I, you know, it's funny because I made choices in the last couple of years where I could have gone to LA, because when Shadowhunters premiered, the production wouldn't get me there because I'm Canadian, you know, they didn't care. They wanted their cast and everyone else that's Canadian. Well, too bad, even though you're a regular or whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, we don't bring you. So I invested all my stuff to be there, join the cast, make it to the premiere, be present. And it paid off, because then I started traveling the world to meet the fans of the series because I was present and I made myself visible. But I did not move there. I went to LA so many times in the last 3 years, but I didn't actually make the move. I wanted to make music, and I don't know, I don't really know what to say. It depends what the person wants, right? At that moment. And for me, it was just come back to Montreal, focus on my art and my music. And I knew the roles would come eventually, you know, but I've seen so many of my friends go, and I'm glad they did. And you know, it pays off. And
I want to ask the question.
Dance, yep.
I want to ask Michael as well, because you teach in Toronto at York University. You have your company, Signal Theatre. So how do you keep a place that is home and still have projects in the States? How's the back and forth? And did you have at some point to commit to a different city, a different country?
Yeah, I was faced with that decision many times, but I never chose to live in Los Angeles. I would stay in Los Angeles while I was working, or back in the day when we had pilot season, you know, I would come to Los Angeles, put myself up in the Hollywood Gardens or wherever, you know, and audition. But then, you know, I'd book work and it would be in Texas or Florida or wherever. So there was never a desire to sort of maintain a year-round residence. And I'm still based in Toronto. I'm still based in Canada. Certainly the position at York solidified that. But even in the past 5 years, as I've not been teaching, the majority of my work comes from the United States. The auditions happen in the United States. And the work that I do in Canada, I mean, I rarely do work in Canada. I think come about because of the visibility that I've built in the US. So despite not living there, I end up working there a lot.
Turning to Emma Seligman, writer, director, like I said, first feature. So you're Canadian, but you've been in the States for a few years. Is it school that brought you to New York in the first place?
Yeah, I went to film school there for my undergraduate degree, and then I stayed and I got my O1 visa. And after that process, I felt like I wanted to stay, but I felt like I had to stay because I fought so hard that application was so grueling. And I had made such a network of friends from film school that I wanted to make work with.
And your first film, actually, it was a short film first, Shiva Baby. I think you made for school at NYU. It's one day for this college student attending the reception after a Jewish funeral service. And there she will cross paths with her ex-girlfriend and her sugar daddy, and awkwardness and shoes. I loved it. So because you started the process with the short film at school in New York, it was natural for you to continue towards the feature still in the US, still in New York. Did you ever think of, let's go back to Toronto, let's say, to do it?
Yeah, I debated, I apologize because I think my internet is a little unstable, but I debated doing it in the US or Canada. I sort of thought I'll wait to see what my visa process, like what the decision is, if I can stay in the States or not. And I was working with friends from my program who were producing it with me. It was all of our first time making a feature. And I just sort of said, if I don't get my visa, then I'll go back to Canada and I'll try to make it there. But I hadn't established a network of friends. I had not worked in the Toronto film industry at all, on set or in any sort of way. So when I was happy when I got my visa, because I sort of thought it would take longer to establish that network and then make the film. But I did think about it quite a bit, and I did research into sort of who I would work with or try to figure it out with preemptively, just in case I didn't get my visa.
And was money a factor also in financing the film? Was it easier in the States, or was there a Canadian incentive? How was money influencing your decision?
I think money is hard to raise or find no matter where you're making your films, especially if it's your first feature. I think that the American process of just being on your own and not having any sort of grant system, government funding, supporting the arts, like makes everyone sort of like a lone wolf, just trying to like attack what's out there. So I don't think that the US necessarily gave me more money to work with or anything, but I think it gave me the attitude and the perspective of just like finding it wherever I could and being really, really aggressive, which as a Canadian and as a woman doesn't come naturally to me, to just like, put myself out there and pitch myself and say like, you're going to get your money back and this is why I'm going to be successful and this film is going to be such a success. So I feel like I had to learn how to take on that attitude. So the money didn't literally come easier in the States, but I think having that attitude made it easier.
And that's actually a question I want to ask the public, people watching right now, this panel. We also want to hear from you. So there's a survey you can fill where we ask, do you think money is the main motivator for Canadian talents to leave the Canadian film industry and maybe try their luck elsewhere? And I'm going to ask also, Tonya, you were saying earlier, people felt like you booked everything, but you were barely surviving in the Canadian industry when you started. So for you, Tonya, was the paycheck worth it leaving? I'm sure living in LA is much more expensive, but I guess there was a financial decision as well.
Yes, it depends where you are. It's great that you have this particular panel because we're also very different in very different age groups, very different, racial diversity, gender. It's also very different. I would say it's still a good decision if you're Black to incorporate the US. It's a big part. We don't have the Will Smiths, the Oprah Winfreys. We don't have the Tyler Perrys. We don't have studios being built and Hollywood really recognizing the importance of Black talent internationally and the kind of money that they can make. We don't have that yet in Canada. So it really depends also. I love what Emma was saying. It's where you've built your relationships. So if you end up going to school in the States, a lot of people you go to school with are the people that you kind of continue with. As you grow, they grow, and you kind of help each other. So yeah, money was definitely a factor. I was certainly making a living in Canada but I was also seeing a lot of people where the length, their career lifespan felt shorter in Canada, and
the limits.
It was limited. And while I was young and attractive still, I wanted to take full advantage of that, because I just saw so many people supplementing their income with working other jobs and doing other things that they weren't satisfied doing. And I knew that I did not want that to be. So I'm very pragmatic in that way. You know, I have this artistic side, but I have a very pragmatic side. So my time, I told you how my agents really didn't want me to take the soap opera, but for me, the soap opera got me my green card. So I'm thinking in very pragmatic ways. It enabled me to buy a house, put savings away, so that by the time I was in my 40s, I could pretty much walk away and say I can do whatever I want to do now. I wasn't sitting with millions, but I was certainly sitting where I'm not going to be homeless on the street. I am comfortable. Now what do I want to do? And I think me creating like the platform of Reelworld, it afforded me to be able to have those options and choices. I don't feel that would have happened for me if I had stayed in Canada at that time.
Jade, do you feel that starting your career with bigger projects maybe gave you a financial net that now you can take a step back and think of the projects and the music you want to do?
It allowed me to do a lot of good things, but I had to fight a lot because I was not treated the same, and because I was Canadian. So that was very difficult to keep confident, you know, when they wanted you to know that you weren't worth as much as the Americans or the UK people or the Australians, you know. So that's very hard for an artist, I think, you know, to feel worthy as you're surrounded by others and you're doing the same thing, but you're just not worth as much. It's just such a mental weird thing. So I had to get over that and sort of push through, and it opened a lot of doors, you know. I mean, I invested the money I made into my career and into my trips to LA and into all that, you know. If I had a meeting with a producer, I would just like go to LA, you know. I wouldn't think twice. Yeah. But I wish I had done things differently. This is like the theme of my week, is I'm looking back, and I mean, everybody's telling me just look forward, but I didn't set myself up to be good, and now I still have to continue and create that safety for me, or that, because now I'm starting to ask myself, like, am I going to do this forever? You know, like, is this what I want to do forever audition and forever like prove to someone that I'm worth to be in their show? You know, like, these are questions I'm starting to ask myself. But yes, it allowed me to create a lot of, you know, my music and a lot of other things that I'm interested in that do fill me up with the strength and the power and the creative force I need to continue this career that's so strange.
Yeah. Michael, did you feel that in the US there's the Canadian difference, maybe the Cree difference? Did you feel that you had to fight a bit more to make a mark, and maybe for salaries or, you know, just respect? Is that was there a clash?
I don't. My experience has to be lensed through the fact that I'm Indigenous. So already Hollywood was looking at my employability within a very narrow frame of reference. Like it was until I did V Wars, which was a Netflix series that I did about 2 years ago. That's about 28 years into an acting career, where I'd been cast as an FBI agent, not a native FBI. Yeah. So you have to understand that my experience has really been dominated by that idea that I couldn't just play something, that it had to be a native something, right? But I didn't find necessarily that I was paid less, or, you know, I had very good representation. So, you know, they would always fight for me. And in the era when I was coming up, they still had the quote system. So there was this opportunity, which, you know, if you worked enough, you could sort of build your way forward. But then that model changed, the California law changed. the industry changed a bit in that, you know, they would always cry poor. We're like, oh, we just don't have the money. You know, everything is favored nations, you know, and then that company would then make a film and it'd be low budget or whatever. And then Sony would buy it or whomever, right? And then all of a sudden, you know, you're like, oh, they have all this money now. I do find that there is a really stark difference when you work in Canada in terms of who has access to what kind of roles. I've worked on a couple of series in Canada. Home Before Dark, you know, V-Wars, another one that's coming out soon. The stars of the series that are filmed in Canada are usually American actors or international actors. And Canadians populate the sort of background secondary roles, which is what I did also as a Canadian. And that's, I think, a unique situation. The Canadian industry is very happy to have the work here because crews are Canadian. Lots of Canadian actors can find work. But I find it's interesting that it's very rare when these shows would choose a Canadian to be the lead. So there is a real disparity in how our employability looks.
It's interesting because I know very well the Quebec side, and Jade knows it too. And in Quebec, we have this star system, and the cinema is really made for people here and exported a bit in Europe, in Francophone country, but it's very distinct cinema. Do you feel that sometimes Canadian cinema and television disappears into the American culture? That's a bit what you say. Is it Canadian show or Canadian film? At some point, the line gets blurred? And we favor maybe American actors and directors, and we don't take care enough maybe of our industry?
I guess that's a complicated question. I find that the work that I've enjoyed the most in Canada comes from my own community, the Indigenous community. So, for example, one of my first feature films was Dancing Outside, and although it was a intercultural project, it featured Native actors. Blood Quantum, you know, Jeff Barnaby's film is a Canadian film.
Yeah.
So I found that within the Indigenous context, Canada has done very, very well. Or I should say, the Indigenous filmmakers and producers and writers have done very well.
And especially recently, so many great projects in the last few years. We see a rise of voices in the Indigenous community for sure. For sure. But if I ask Jade, do you see a difference when you leave Quebec? Canadian projects in English or American projects, for you, is the distinction a bit blurred, or is it very different?
Well, my experience is that the system is made so that it's like, and I don't know, I've had a kind of my experience is a bit tainted because it was very like, Canadians have their place and Americans have their place, you know. It was kind of like that, and I didn't want to think like that. I wanted to be one of the ones included in all that, you know. And but that's how it feels to me. I feel like our industry is kind of built to give room for the United States, and I think the business side of it is happy and the financial side of it is like happy to be that way, but the artists aren't, because we want to push through. And a lot of artists and directors and people creating stuff, they are pushing through and they're creating amazing content. But I mean, in the system of like, you know, a lot of the studios are rented for American shows or films, and Canadian stuff kind of, I don't know, it gets diluted a little bit. That's what I feel.
Earlier, I think it's Tonya who said something about the people around us when we're in school and we keep meeting them, and it becomes a bit of a family. And I'm thinking about Emma staying in the US to do her film. I remember in film school, the first thing I was ever told is, look around you. The people around the table are the people you will make films with. So you had that little tribe around you to make your first film. But is there maybe that desire to at some point come back to Canada, or for you feel that you're too rooted with your people and your group of fellow filmmakers to make the move back?
No, I definitely want to come back to Canada and make tell Canadian stories. So I think where it's applicable to make, to tell Canadian stories, it makes sense to make them within the Canadian framework and business. It's not one that I have experience in though. So who knows what will happen if I don't like it, or, if I have complications with it, or it's not what I'm used to.
But then
but
can I
I
ask you,
certainly
what
want
would
to
be a
try it.
Canadian story when you say I want to go back to Canada and do Canadian story? What is that to you? How is it different?
Films that take place in Canada. I mean, I'm sure there's stories that can take place anywhere, but I think geography is really important to me. And most of the stories that I would like to tell are told within a specific setting that I'm from or have lived in and have experience in. And who knows, there could be films that I pitch on that I end up directing that have a sort of a location that could be filmed anywhere. But I think that it's an active choice. It seems like from the sort of conversations that I've had with Canadian filmmakers and Canadian production companies, if I wanted to make something within the Canadian system, it's sort of a choice to leave the system that I'm used to. But I've only made one feature film, so I feel lucky that I have representation now in the US, and I am starting to understand the system here. However, my film was made completely independently. I felt almost like it wasn't really made within a system, because my friends and I raised the money on our own. And I think we could have done that anywhere, even though it's sort of, like I said, with an American attitude. But I would like to make movies with many different people. So I don't feel tied to the friends that I made Shiva Baby with, although, I would like to continue working with them again and again. No, I definitely, there's stories that I would like to tell that take place, in Toronto or in Canada. And I think that, it's a goal of mine to be able to come back and tell those stories, there, not just with an American production company shooting there, but, within the framework of the Canadian system.
Your film did really well in festivals, and yes, it's opening doors for you. You're still like in the process to find out which doors and how, but do you think that the fact that you had American actors that we recognize, that it helped, that it gave that extra push, that if you had taken Canadian actors are not as well known and recognized easily, do you feel that that American angle gave you an extra push?
Definitely. Yeah, 100%. I think, but also, a lot of it, I think a lot of it was about name recognition. My God, I can't speak. I think, but a lot of it was also specific. We made the movie for very little money. A lot of us weren't paid, and we needed the actors to be local to New York. We needed them to be able to take the subway to get to set, because we couldn't afford to pick them up. And all of them were just down to make an indie in the summer. And basically, their daily, the SAG rate, which was micro budget, so it was scale, afforded Ubers there and back for them, and if they didn't want to take the subway. So I mean, I don't know, like, it's tough. I think, that's sort of a cop-out answer, because it really was about name recognition. But it wasn't like we had the chance to like cast from a pool of actors and decide like who we wanted and audition people. We offered the roles to people, and it was about convenience and recognition and who was right for the role, etc.
There's a second question I want to ask the audience, people watching this panel. If you think at home that the Canadian film industry, does it allow enough creative diversity for actors, for directors? Is it a creative soil in Canada to make films? What do you think, Emma? Do you think that if you had to come back to Canada and maybe apply to different programs, do you think you would have made the films you made as an indie freely in the States? Like, do you feel that you were freer maybe?
Definitely, yeah. But I think we were freer because we didn't have anybody. We didn't have any production companies. We didn't have any studios. So, I think that if we were we tried to make it with the help of more experienced people, whether they be at a production company or where they were professional financiers. And I'm sure if that we had done that, we would have felt obligated to appease them in different ways, whether it be through casting or in script changes or in the crew, etc. So I feel like we were on an island, because it's not even we decided to, raise the money independently. We just sort of had to. And it was like a yes or, it was like, this is happening, or there's no way this isn't happening. We put like a sort of time bomb on it. We said it has to happen this summer. It's never going to happen. So, I mean, I don't really know. I think any sort of system guides you through, has restrictions on who you can cast or what you can do. I don't have experience with telefilm, etc. So I'm not sure what that process is like, but I'm sure that anyone that's giving you money has opinions and rules about, what you have to do in order for them to give you money.
Tonya, in your experience, what do you think about the creative liberty? Do you feel that maybe Hollywood has this very Hollywoodian system, and sometimes they really want to do films almost paint by number, or like, where do you feel the creativity is more free, in the States or in Canada?
Well, I don't know. That kind of freedom is really an internal thing. It's not even really an external thing from what other people are doing or what other decisions are being made. Hollywood is about making money. And if they can make it money in a totally indie film, where a horror movie where a camera is just left on the ground and kids are screaming and all kinds of things are happening, but it's making big dollars, they'll do that. And if it's an Avengers, from a comic book, they'll do what makes money. But going back to something you were saying before that I feel very strongly about too, it's not always Americans sort of taking advantage of Canadians. Canadians allow themselves to be taken advantage of. There are things that agents just allow their talent to do in Canada that agents in America just would say no. And I think the Americans have gotten used to the fact that agents just kind of go along. Whatever you say, they're shocked. They'd say to me all the time, I can't believe I suggested that. And they were like, yeah. So when Jade is saying something like, I didn't get flown down, or the way I was treated, he's treated that way because of how it was negotiated for him. Producers here and Hollywood here respect the hard no. You can't have that person. This is what they need. You're going to have to fly them down. This is all put in a contract. And so if on one hand, a Canadian agent is going to be like, yeah, okay, that's fine. We'll take that. We'll do that with very little pushback. And of course, in pushback, it means you may lose a gig. But if enough people did it in Canada, eventually Americans would gather around and go, oh, the climate has changed. They're not going to just take scale anymore. They want all these other, props that happen. And I know it because it's happened to me. I spent my early years working in Canada, but I've done very little working in Canada because my agents will sometimes call and go. And this is just hilarious to me because I don't even know why you would call. He said, there's a job. They really want you. It's in Nova Scotia. They need you to pay your own airfare. And is there anyone you can stay with while you're there? And it's just a little under scale. So I will say to him, so basically, if I lose $500, I have the privilege of packing all my clothes, getting to LAX, flying for 5-6 hours and getting there so I can do 2 days work, you said, at under scale. Let me think about that for a minute. No, I don't even know why would you be asking people this? People all the time will say with Hollywood agents or American agents, they'll say, actors don't even hear about those jobs. Because your agent will just go, no.
And filter
all that stuff out. So it ups your value. You can't even get to that actor without passing this gateway, and this gateway is ready to say no to you already. So I think we need to toughen up. What Emma was saying, how she really had to hustle to get her film. I think we need more of that hustle in the States. And if you're going to go toe to toe with America, and you want your talent to, exist on that same plane, I think you're going to have to hustle a little. And the fact that we don't have the star system is built into that as well. I mean, we need to, I don't know what that is, but even producers in Canada, they don't value the actors in Canada. They'll spend all their money looking for American actors, looking for UK actors, looking for Australian actors, because they themselves feel we're not getting the cachet with a Canadian actor. It devalues who you are, and that's something we need to get over internally. And I think actors need to raise up against that too.
Michael was horrified at the beginning of what you were saying. You had that kind of experience also, Michael, of being offered the privilege of paying your own gig.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a point in your career where, you know, at the beginning you'll sort of go, oh my gosh, I have a job. I'm so excited. But then there comes another point where, you know, my agents will just say, okay, so that offer was not anywhere near where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And so if you want this actor, me, this is what it's going to take. It's exactly what Tonya had said. And so you just need to have a different kind of representation. Just so you know, I have my managers in Los Angeles, and my agent is also based in LA. I have Canadian representation, but they work as a team. So in a way, I have the best of both worlds. But I think also it's really interesting when I'm listening to the conversation that the frame of the questions is, you know, Canada versus the United States, or us versus them. I live in Canada. You know, I cheer for, you know, Canadian athletes at the Olympics. But I look at myself as a citizen of Turtle Island. You know, Indigenous people were here, you know, throughout the Americas. So I look at the opportunities of work, whether it's in Texas, California, or Vancouver, or Toronto. It's just simply work. Why would there be a barrier for me artistically and financially? Because money doesn't care about borders. Money will go to where it needs to go. So I look at that kind of nationalist, you know, sort of frame, and it doesn't make sense to me. I will work where work will pay me. So I think that's my philosophy in terms of where I work, and of course the projects that interest me are ones in which Indigenous people are empowered and joyful and successful. Yeah. So it kind of limits the kind of work that does get offered to me, but I think I've enjoyed a certain amount of success with that.
There is the dream of Hollywood, of bigger projects, of the big trailer, and yeah, bigger projects. There's this Hollywood dream. And Jade, I know that you were a bit disappointed by this world. I heard that at some point it was not on a human scale. You felt, I think, that you like to come back to more human projects.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when I was doing Shadowhunters, I was also creating a web series with people in Toronto, very independent. So I had the contrast of like huge multi-million-dollar project, Disney, Netflix, everything, and then like 6 people crew shooting a thing. And I realized, wow, the satisfaction is so different, you know, as a human, as an artist. And it was still fun. It was still as fun to do both, but I just saw the difference, and I started seeing like what really fulfills me, and what I like and how I like to be treated and things like that. Like Tonya was saying, I said I quit the show many times. Actually, I said no many times throughout the 4 seasons. So luckily they brought me back, you know, even after I'd said no. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I still want to do those things. I still want that. It's just I'm not as desperate as I used to be. Maybe I'm not as like, I want this dream, because I saw that it's just like a illusion, you know, and real things are the experiences with people and the experiences on set, and those are the real things. And like a billboard is just like a really big, you know, poster. It's just a photo printed on a huge paper, and that's all it is, really, you know. And you look at it and you're like, that's a huge billboard, and I'm right here, and that's just the paper. And I'm, you know, it's like these things just made me realize and the way I wanted to be treated and all that stuff. So, I mean, I'm still exploring all that. I'm still discovering, you know, and life's taking me where it's taking me, and I'm kind of going with it now, and I'm choosing my projects based on if I really want to put my whole soul into it or not. So I'm
so
still
hopefully
discovering.
for you, the next step is a bit of music, a bit of acting in Quebec, a bit of acting in English, and just navigating those different spheres in your life.
Exactly. I'm back at the point in my life where I don't know what's coming next, as we all kind of get to eventually. And, you know, it's scary. It's exciting. It feels over. You know, it always feels like it's over forever. But this is making me feel like it's not, you know.
And you're not alone.
Yeah, exactly.
And Tonya, what's next for you? You're between LA, Toronto, you have Reelworld. What are the next
I
months
wanted
for you?
to let, especially Jade and Emma, I'm 63 this year. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up. Everybody thinks, oh, this is the one opportunity that I missed and there's never going to be another one. It is completely unrealistic. And yeah, right now I'm so focused on the Reelworld platform, and not only the festival, we're expanding the year-round programs and Access Reelworld, which is now the database that has just taken off so much, especially in the last 12 months. But that is so fulfilling for me. I haven't been, it's not that auditions haven't been there. I have not had the desire to go on an audition, to tell you the truth. And that's almost funny for me to say, because I was that actor, you know, with the clothes in the back of the car, and you would change wherever you could and be there for the next audition. I just don't feel, I love acting still, but that whole, you know, you just reach an age where that gets tired. I think it was Alfred Wooder in an interview once, she said, I knew it when I turned up at this audition and these two kids were auditioning me and they were eating a sandwich off my 8x10 photo that was on the table. And she goes, and all I could think of was, I need to get my groceries and I had to pick up my kids, and, you know, I had to make food for the dinner. And I didn't want to be there. And she reached a stage where she literally just said, only offers. I don't even want to go. And I know people might say, you know, it sounds like, oh, they're being so difficult, they don't want to audition for something. But there are literally things I asked to audition for that is the work that I've done for 40 years. It's not even a stretch character. It is exactly what I've done for 40 years. You're like, at what point do you just say, would you like to do this part? I could understand if it was something so extreme from what I've ever done, but it is sometimes when it's exactly what you do. I got to tell you though, something that happened when I was in Toronto, I would go into castings. And this is not, I mean, you know, this is really not putting down people, you know, but I would go in and you really felt like you were intruding on the casting director. You know, they'd be like, oh yeah, sign over there, get this, sit over there, whatever. But when I first arrived in LA, and you have to understand, I hadn't done anything and nobody knows me. And I walked in that first audition, I was like, is this what it's like? Oh, because casting person was like, oh yes, who are you, Tonya? Oh yes, Tonya, so glad that you could come in. Could you come this way? We're just running like a couple of minutes behind. If you could sit right there, bathrooms over there. Can I get you a water, whatever? I really felt like I was a superstar from just the way she made me feel. And when I went into the audition, I felt like they all knew my name and that I had arrived from Canada, and so glad that you're here. And you feel different. I created a different audition than feeling like, oh, just sit over there and we really don't care if you're here or not or whatever. And go in and people kind of look up and like, what? Yeah. Oh, okay, go. It makes you feel different.
And Michael, after those great roles you had in the States, I'm thinking True Detective, I know this much is true. I'm thinking of this new win for Blood Quantum. Are you still in that audition mode we're just describing, or are roles coming to you more and more?
I audition. I had a film that was in competition at Sundance this year called Wild Indian, which is being released theatrically this fall. Great reviews. That was an offer because the filmmaker really saw me in that role. But right now I'm doing Rutherford Falls, an American series. Of course, you know, I auditioned, screen tested for that. So I don't think I'm at a stage in my life. And I auditioned for Blood Quantum, which I won, you know, the award for. So I'm not at that stage where I get a lot of offers, and I'm happy to audition, you know, because at least the work that's coming I know this much is true. Derek Cianfrance, Mark Ruffalo, these are wonderful, wonderful roles. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity. And I think as an Indigenous actor, I have an obligation to my community, the artistic community that I come from, to, be part of projects that have resonance. So I'm fortunate, I'm waiting for my next audition.
Emma, what's coming up for you? You're writing, you're in discussion for projects. Where are you at in the next step for your career?
I'm in development at this point for different projects, but it's interesting sort of having this conversation of Toronto or Canada versus Hollywood, because I didn't make my first film within the Hollywood studio system. So now that I've, been afforded representation and also more work from the success of my first film, now is the beginning of me working within the system and writing and developing, studio/network projects. So I haven't experienced that yet. So that is what seems to be the next step for me, is making the projects that I've wanted to for a while within this system, within, the funding of the studio system, but then also pitching on projects that aren't my own, just to direct or just to write. So that's what's next. So I feel like maybe then I'll be able to speak from this perspective on the studio side, et cetera, in terms of versus Canada. But, so that's what's next for me.
And that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Michael Greyeyes, to Tonya Williams, Emma Seligman, Jade Hassouné. It was such a pleasure to have this conversation with you for this third panel. Thank you to the Canadian Academy of Film and Television for having us. And we want to hear from people at home. So right now you're going to see on the YouTube channel a little survey. Please fill it out so we can hear your opinion on different issues that were raised today or in the past panels. Feel free to join us as well on Reddit, where the discussion is going to continue after this panel, and hopefully see you soon, maybe in a movie theater. Thank you so much, and hope to meet you in person very soon.